Hello and welcome to the Crunchy Conversations podcast. I'm your host, Lena Elsaya, also known as It's Crunchy Lena on Instagram. Crunchy Conversations is a podcast dedicated to creating open and honest dialogue between myself and fellow naturally minded or crunchy parents, people, and practitioners. I put out episodes of Crunchy Conversations weekly, so don't forget to subscribe on your favorite podcast listening app. You can follow the podcast on Facebook or Instagram just by searching up Crunchy Conversations. And while you're at our Facebook page, don't forget to join our Facebook group, the Crunchy Conversations community, to connect with other like-minded people. And if you want to further support the show, you can sign up for monthly donations at anchor.fm/crunchyconversations or make a one-time donation at paypal.me/crunchyconversations. Thank you so much for your support, and I hope you enjoyed this episode of Crunchy Conversations. Today on the podcast, I'm talking to a local to me mama named Sophia Medina about her homebirth cesarean and what postpartum looked like for her after that. Without further ado, let's jump into the interview. Sophia, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hey, Lena, thanks for having me. I'm a stay-at-home mom to a 15-month-old boy who is super curious. We're living in the South Bronx right now. My husband and I have been here for 5.5 years, actually. And yeah, I never thought I'd have kids in the city, but here we are. And it's been great. I love being home with him. Before I was a mom, I was a nanny for 3 years to 2 girls on the Upper East Side. So it was kind of like mom practice, but it's really nice being home with my own child instead of being in someone else's home with their child. But yeah, definitely my years in childcare have formed my decisions as a parent, which is pretty cool.
Speaking on your decisions as a parent, the reason that I actually know you is because we had the same midwife. Mm-hmm. Which is really awesome. And I love how tight-knit the midwifery community in our area is, because I've met so many other women who just through, our midwife and through that community. And it's really cool that she's creating a space for moms like us.
I've totally had my eyes open to the whole home birth community. And yeah, it's very tight-knit. So everybody knows everybody. And it's a really supportive, cool group of people. So I feel pretty lucky to have found it.
So I was curious as to why, as a first-time mom, you decided to go with a home birth midwifery practice versus, do like the normal or like the standard of our society, which is, go with an OB-GYN or go with a hospital midwife. So would you like to talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So I've always been really interested in alternative ways of dealing with minor health issues, so herbal remedies before going to Motrin or Tylenol, trying to see if I can use alternative methods for healing and as much as possible. Of course, I do think there's time and place, as we'll talk later, for allopathic medicine, but I was always into the kind of alternative things. I watched shows Call the Midwife, and I was kind of I didn't know a lot about birth, but I was really interested in it. So even before I got pregnant, I kind of learned a lot about birth and was kind of shocked by the statistics in our country surrounding mortality and birth. It's really not okay that we spend the most money on healthcare, but we still have a really high maternal mortality rate in this country. And we also have a really high C-section rate for a quote unquote advanced first world country. The C-section rate should be, I think it's supposed to be around 15% or something. And ours is over 30% in this country. And I think a lot of the time it's convenience that, it's easier to schedule a C-section for doctors rather than waiting for a woman to go into labor naturally or waiting for maybe a 4-day labor to just take its course. They would rather, just be oh, well, something must be wrong. Well, let's just do a C-section. So ironically enough, I ended up having a C-section, but I chose to go to home birth because I was trying to avoid not only a C-section, but all the interventions. I really wanted to see if I could give birth naturally, which isn't my favorite term, but meaning vaginally and without medication. And I thought my best bet of doing that would be at home because you're allowed to basically do whatever you want. You're allowed to walk around. You can labor in any position you want. You can eat. You can watch TV. You can sit in a bathtub or go in the shower. There's no restrictions. Whereas at the hospital, if they want to monitor you, you can't get off the bed, or they're monitoring you all the time and they feel the slightest, change in your baby's heart rate, which is normal during contractions because they're getting squeezed, they think, oh, the baby's in distress, we need to do this intervention. So I wanted to have like a little bit less monitoring, a little bit more freedom. And I felt the best way to do that would be home birth. And actually my husband and I talked about doing a birth center birth, which he would have been more comfortable with and I would have been totally fine with. But the options in New York City for birthing centers are almost none. There's one freestanding birth center in Brooklyn.
I believe it's Brooklyn, yeah.
Yeah.
And then there's the one in Stanford, Connecticut. Not Stanford, sorry, Danbury. And I think that those are the only... Oh, well, you guys might have been close to the Jersey one.
I mean, but even so, like, none of them were close.
When we were planning Scott's birth, we also were like, oh, let's do a birth center. So we went to the one in Danbury. And after sitting in an hour and a half of traffic one day, I was like, no, this is not going to work.
Right. Because depending on the time of day, yeah, you could be sitting in the car for a couple hours trying to get to the birthing center. It's not a situation I wanted to be in. We interviewed midwives and we really liked Nisa, who was your midwife too. And we got a doula. She was amazing. And we actually became friends and we're still in touch. So that was why I chose a home birth, because I really just wanted those freedoms and I wanted my body to be able to do what it is supposed to do.
I think that those are a lot of good reasons. And, as you were speaking, you said you wanted to avoid a C-section. But for me, part of why I chose a home birth with Scott was I wanted to avoid an unnecessary C-section. That was a real big thing for me. All the hospitals in my area, like the ones within a 20-minute drive from me, all have ridiculous C-section rates besides the one that I had Dexter in, and I couldn't go back there. I knew if I was having a home birth and we needed to transfer for some reason and I needed to have a C-section, that it would have been, necessary and unavoidable versus as what you said, sometimes when you're in the hospital, you're in labor for 4 days and a doctor doesn't want to wait for you to finish up being in labor and they just choose a C-section on their own convenience. If I was with an OB-GYN, that would have happened with Dexter, I'm sure of.
Did you have a midwife with him?
Yeah, I had a hospital midwife. The practice that I went to could kind of more be considered a midwifery practice. They're very push Pitocin, push epidurals. And I had the most holistically minded out of all of them. After talking to several people in the birth community in our area, they agree with that statement. Do you want to go a little bit into how your labor started?
I had actually scheduled to go to a cloth diapering class that night. It was a week and a half before my son was due. First time babies tend to be late. So I was like, I have plenty of time. He's going to be here in 2 weeks. It's fine. So I scheduled a bunch of stuff. It was a Friday. No, it was a Thursday, actually. I scheduled a bunch of stuff, including a cloth diapering class at night. My sister was coming for the next couple of days to hang out. My mom and other sister were going to come on the weekend. And Thursday morning, I woke up and I went to the bathroom at 7 a.m. And I stood up and washed my hands. And then liquid started coming out of me. And I was like, but I just peed. And it just didn't stop. And I was like, well, I can't hold it in, so I'm not peeing. But it wasn't in the movies where your water explodes. So I texted my doula and I was like, I think my water's leaking. It's not stopping, but and I just put a pad on because I was like, this is I can't just do nothing about it. So that went on for a couple hours. And then I started having very minor kind of period cramps, they felt like. And I had really severe cramps growing up. So I was like, this is fine. But I could tell it was labor because I was like, I know what it feels like to have my uterus cramping and contracting because I had it every time I had my period. It was pretty minor and it was every half hour or so. And it went on like that for 2 days. So I was able to sleep Thursday night and then I was able to sleep Friday night, but I had kind of figured out that I was in early labor because it was regular and the water was still leaking. I didn't feel like anything was wrong, but I was like, okay, I'm having regular cramps and water leaking. So that sounds like labor. Around noon Saturday, the contractions started really picking up. And I was like, okay, this is starting to be active labor. And it was getting to where they were 10 minutes apart. And then they were closer together. And so I called my midwife, I called the doula, I had them come over and the midwife could see that I wasn't I might be in active labor, but I wasn't in transition. I wasn't about to have the baby anytime soon. So she didn't stick around, but my doula kind of came and I think she stayed for the most of the day on Saturday. And then at night, nothing was happening. So I was like, you can go home, you can, sleep. She also had a son. So I wanted her to be able to be with her kid and also be well rested because I was hoping that Sunday would be the day. Because at this point, I'd already been Thursday, Friday, Saturday. Saturday was the only real active labor day though. So Thursday and Friday, I don't technically count. It was like pretty easy. I could sleep, I like made jam one day. So I had energy and I was like doing stuff. Between Saturday and Sunday, overnight, I let my husband sleep. I let my doula sleep. And I sat in the birthing tub for like hours and contracted basically every 5 minutes and like listened to Harry Potter on audiobook. That was the whole night. And it was a long night. I was so tired because I didn't really sleep except between contractions. So I was like, okay, Sunday is the day. Like he's coming. It's going to happen. Sunday is pretty much the same as Saturday, like contractions every 5 minutes. They started to get to the point where like I couldn't talk through them. And I was just getting really tired because we were trying different positions because we were thinking, okay, it's taking a while because baby's not in the best position. So he's trying to get into the right position. So we did all kinds of inverted postures and squatting. And I like was upside down on the couch and I was upside down on the bed and I walked around and I went up and down the stairs and I did mile circuit and the contractions just weren't getting closer together. And like when I was really tired, the midwife was like, okay, look, why don't you get in the shower for a little bit just to give you some relief? Because the hot water on my back was just like the most amazing thing, but it would slow the contractions down. So she was like, okay, after a few minutes, just come out again so you can pick back up.
And now a quick break from our show to talk about one of Earthly's incredible products. Earthly is a small family-owned company that's dedicated to bringing you products that are made with ingredients that you can find straight from the earth. This week's featured product is Earthly's Good Night Lotion. Earthly's Good Night Lotion is made out of magnesium flakes and lavender essential oil if you want. There's also an unscented version for those of you who don't like scents. I use this stuff on Scott and myself every single night. All I do is I take a little bit, about a pea-sized portion, and I rub it onto Scott's feet, and I rub some onto my shoulders. And since I've added Earthly's Good Night Lotion to our nightly routine, we've both been sleeping a lot better. In each teaspoon of the Good Night Lotion, there's about 200 milligrams of magnesium, and it's safe to use on your entire family. If you're interested in trying Earthly's Good Night Lotion, just click the link in the show notes page. And now back to our show.
So it went on like that again all day Sunday. And then Sunday night, I said, okay, everybody go home, get some sleep because I'm going to need you to have energy because baby's coming tomorrow. Again, I spent the night in the birthing tub, just like listening to Harry Potter and laboring by myself. So then Monday, the doula came over, the midwife came over, and I was like, guys, if he doesn't come today, we have to go to the hospital. I was like, I cannot do another night of this. I was so tired. I was getting very frustrated. My husband was getting nervous because he's like, we kept Googling like, average labor time for first-time moms. And it was like 12 to 24 hours, which passed like 2 days earlier. But I didn't feel like anything was wrong. The baby was being monitored closely the whole time. He was never in any distress as far as like his heart rate going down or anything like that. So we actually ended up having an acupuncturist come to our house who's supposed to help move things along and get baby into the right position. So she was doing acupuncture on me and I had to like be really still while the needles were in me, like during each contraction, which was so hard because of course during a contraction, you want to just get into a position that you find comfortable, which for me was like on my knees with my like arms on the couch and my doula like compressing my hips together. That was most comfortable, or like with her hands on my lower back. But I couldn't do that when I had these needles in. So I had to just basically sit there and like contract like without moving, which is so hard.
That's really difficult because when I was in labor with Dexter, I ended up getting an epidural because Pitocin contractions are just something different. And they made me stay still while doing that. And I just like, it's like really the hardest thing in the entire universe to do.
So hard. It's because it doesn't feel natural. Your body's like, I need to be in this other position. You're like fighting your like animal instinct to like do what's going to move birth along. The acupuncturist was really sweet. And she like talked to me about, my emotional space that I was in, because a lot of times if you're having any kind of fear about birthing or you're nervous or you're having some kind of like reaction from like your childhood or something, it can actually stall labor because your body is having this like adrenaline reaction. So it's not opening the way it needs to give birth. And I talked to her and I was like, no, I'm like really confident. I'm like really excited for this baby to come. I like had a really healthy pregnancy. I feel fine, except that I'm exhausted. I can't wait to meet him. I just want him to come out because I'm like, this is like, I can't keep doing this. And she was like, okay, like I predict that he's going to come within 12 hours. And I was like, 12 hours. Oh my God. I think after she left, we did like another hour or two of laboring and like the contractions just weren't getting closer together. So finally my midwife said, let's do a vaginal exam. And we'd waited because when your water is broken, any kind of internal exam can introduce bacteria into the uterus. And you don't want to do that because it can create infection for the baby. And there's not really any real reason to be checking your cervix because it doesn't matter really how dilated it is unless you're like me and you're 4 days along, you need to figure out what's going on. So she did the exam, which was really uncomfortable. And when she was done, she's like, okay, you're 7 centimeters. And I was like, yes, that's awesome. And she's like, no, I'm feeling something squishy. And I'm like, what? Because like you should be feeling the top of the baby's head, which is not squishy, it's hard. And she's like, I think he's face presenting. And I was like, oh my God, which of course makes it way harder to deliver because the face is not the smallest part of the head, like the crown is, which is why babies usually come out crown first. So if a baby's face presenting, they're going to need some help coming out. She was like, can I check again? And I was like, well, wait, because that was really uncomfortable. I'm exhausted. What's going to happen? Like, if you check again, like, are we going to go to the hospital? And she's like, we're going to the hospital regardless. And I was like, then let's just go to the hospital. I really don't want to do another exam. I'm so tired. Like, I would take an epidural at this point. As much as I didn't want to do it, I was like, this is the time for it because like I need to relax. It's been days. I'm so tired. I have no energy. So we got in the car, we went to the hospital, and we went to a hospital that was a little bit far because it has a really good midwifery program. And because it wasn't an emergency, we weren't rushing because we have a hospital that's a few blocks away, but it's not a great hospital. So we went to one that was half an hour away in the North Bronx. Oh my gosh, riding in a car while you're in labor sucks. Every time you get in a contraction, you have to like lift your butt off the seat because your whole body like hurts and like the bumpy road makes it so much worse.
Yeah, that's like one of my biggest fears in labor is being in a car. That's just, it sounds so horrible. I'm sorry you had to go through that.
It was hard, but I was also like, I knew that we were going to the hospital and that would mean things were changing. So I was like, I can do this. It's half an hour. We're going to just get there. And my doula sat in the back with me and she did her thing. And she was so amazing throughout this whole thing. She was my angel. She knew exactly how to touch me. She knew when to tell me to eat. She was amazing. And like, whenever we have another child, she's 100% going to be there. Like, I don't care if I have to fly her in, like if she's moved or whatever. And I always recommend to everybody now that asks them like to get a doula because 100% it was the best thing that we did for our birth.
So, doulas really, really make a difference. You know, they really are there to protect your emotional space and they really do keep your best interests in mind. And I recommend any birthing person, no matter what their birth plan is, to get.
Oh, definitely. And the other thing is that they help your partner to help you. So like instead of your partner having to be your entire support system, my husband has never been with someone giving birth. I mean, he's seen birth because he was trained in the medical field, but he's never like been with a birthing person for like 4 days of labor. Like he doesn't know what to do. He didn't know what to look for. He didn't know what to say or how to behave. And like he needed to sleep and he needed to eat and he needed to watch out for his own emotional well-being and his mental well-being. And the doula enabled him to do that because they took turns and they like really tag teamed it. I couldn't have done it without either of them. Anyone who is afraid that a doula might like replace their partner, I'm absolutely like, no way. If anything, they make your partner a better birthing partner because they are allowed to step away and take a break if they need to. They're allowed to have their own like feelings and reactions separate from what's going on with the mother. And that's like such an empowering thing. And it's like the only way that you can get through a long labor because nobody has the stamina to be alone with a birthing person for that long. It's so draining. And we also had our dog with us and like someone had to go walk the dog. So it was such a miracle having her. So anyways, we all went to the hospital. We all, meaning my husband, my doula, my midwife, and me. The midwife called ahead to tell she had other midwives there that she knew who work in the hospital. So she called them to let them know we were coming. When we got there, the head midwife who she called, she came up to me and she was like, hi, like she told me her name and she introduced herself and I like held out my hand to like shake her hand. And she like just gave me this massive hug and I just like started crying because I was so tired and I just like really needed that hug. So that was a really nice reception into the hospital. And she was like, okay, let's do an ultrasound and see what's going on. And they did an ultrasound and she's like, okay, so baby's breech. And I was like, what? He had like flipped since the last time I'd had my stomach checked. Like babies can flip in labor. So we don't actually know when he flipped, but he flipped, he was breech. And I said to her, like, so what was that squishy thing that like the midwife was feeling? And she's like, oh, that was his testicles. I was like, oh, baby. She thought it was his face, but it was his death clothes. So they were like, when you're at the hospital, they pretty much don't do breech vaginal deliveries anymore. I think there might be one doctor in the city who does, but it's like super rare. So they were like C-section, and that was my only option. And I was like, at that point, I didn't have the energy to fight it. And I was also like, you know what? He needs to come out. Like, it's been days. He's probably exhausted. I'm exhausted. Like, we just need to do this. And like between the time that they said C-section and the time that I would be in the OR was like 20 minutes. It was so fast. I was just a whirlwind. And I was kind of scared, but I was kind of relieved. And like when they gave me the epidural for the surgery, it was like the biggest relief of my life, because I was just like, oh my God, no more contractions. It was such a relief, very quickly followed by like, oh my God, I'm having major surgery right now, which I've never had any surgery ever. Like, I've had stitches once and that's it. I've never even broken a bone. So it was like such a big pill to swallow, but it went really well, like considering everything. He had a really high APGAR score. He was a 9. He was totally perfect when he came out. He was like totally perfect weight. He was born 1 week early. So like 39 weeks, but he was like totally average weight, good length, like nice and pink, screaming. The doula and midwife helped him latch like right after surgery. And we didn't get to do delayed cord clamping. We didn't get to do skin to skin immediately. Like, he went right on the scale and they like cleaned him up. I didn't get to see if he had vernix on him or not. Like, these things are things that I definitely feel like I missed out on with like not having a home birth, because I was really excited about all that. And my biggest regret is that they asked me if I wanted to keep my placenta. And I had wanted to, because I wanted to bury it in our community garden. And in the fog of surgery, I was just like, no, like just I don't care, because I hadn't prepared myself. Like, how do you bring it home from the hospital? Do you need like a cooler? Like, I just didn't think about it. And I knew we'd be in the hospital for a few days. And I was like, I just can't think about this. So I didn't do anything with that. So that was hard. But all of this didn't really hit me until like a few days later, because you're so out of it. You're so tired. You have this new baby. You're like, this is such a miracle. I was so happy that he was okay and that I was okay. And like, all things considered, it went really well. We didn't have to go to the NICU. I didn't get infected. Everything went as smoothly as it could have, considering the situation.
Yeah. And I think in your like situation, if I were in your shoes, I would have chosen to have a C-section as well, just because you were in labor for so long. You were so tired, and the both of you really just needed a break. I'm really thankful that you had that option, and then that you had support to get that C-section, and that midwife who greeted you at the hospital was so welcoming. That really sets the tone, I think, for the entire experience for you. And I'm happy that you seem to have had a pretty decent experience in the hospital. And I want to ask, how has it been postpartum, recovering not only from the C-section, but recovering from the home birth transfer? And how have you had support throughout that?
So the physical recovery was actually pretty good. So the day after your surgery, they recommend you get up and start walking around, which to me seems like, what, one day post-op? I mean, they cut through so many layers of your body to get to your uterus. I mean, it's literally to the core of you. And then they sew up all those layers and you're just expected to start moving around the next day. But I mean, you also have this little baby who's depending on you. So they actually say the longer you wait to get up and walk around, the longer it takes to heal. Which makes sense, because you have to keep your whole body moving so that it remembers what to do. It knows how to heal in a way that you're going to still be able to move freely. Because otherwise, if you just heal laying down, then when you do start trying to walk and move around, the layers are going to fuse together. These are all things I'd never had thought about. It was interesting to be in that situation. And also I tried so hard to resist the C-section, and it just really taught me that, to resist any interventions really. And it just taught me that birth is such a wild thing, that you can really do everything, quote, right. You can exercise, you can eat well, you can take all the classes, you can try and do a home birth. And I did all those things, but yet I still ended in C-section. Whereas somebody who maybe doesn't take care of their body at all and doesn't do anything special can still have an unmedicated birth.
I really think that's an important message, because there's so many people within the natural parenting community that just assume that because they plan it this way, it's going to end up this way. But at the end of the day, birth is not just your story, it's your baby's story. So you have to consider
Definitely.
what they wanted within their birth. And that was a big thing for me after Dexter's birth. I would say to myself, well, we didn't go with my plan, but we went with Dexter's plan. And that helped me to like process it, because it didn't feel so like out of control after saying that to myself, you know, because at the end of the day, it's all planned, you know?
Exactly. So anyways, as far as like emotional support, I did feel really lucky that I had the midwife that we had. She was incredible because her sister actually had a home birth transfer that ended in C-section. So she was actually quite familiar with the situation, even though it was the first time that it had happened with her, like to one of her clients. And so she had already had these resources. So the main thing that she recommended for me was a book called Homebirth Cesarean, which is basically a term that refers to someone who's planning a home birth and ends up going to the hospital and having a C-section. So there's a book that someone wrote about it. And then there's a Facebook group for women who have been in that situation. So I joined the group and I read the book, and like both were extremely cathartic, because the book is just like so on point, except that her situation, the woman who wrote it, was way worse because she had no support from her midwife afterwards. Like her midwife left her at the hospital. And like my midwife waited until I was done with the C-section and like helped my baby latch. And then she came to my house as soon as we were home, and she came for all my postnatal checks. And she was a nurse before she was a midwife. So she examined my incision and advised me on how to clean it and stuff. So she was amazing. And the Homebirth Cesarean Facebook group was incredible because these women are all in the same exact situation where they all did, quote, the right things throughout their whole pregnancy, and they still ended up having a C-section. So it made me just feel less alone, because there's small things that will like really frustrate me or like kind of trigger me that people will say or do. And it's like no one else can really understand unless they've been in that situation where they've like planned to have a really unmedicated, like calm, familiar environment home birth and ended up with like the exact opposite, which is a sterilized operating table birth. And then also struggling with the feeling that you didn't actually give birth because your baby didn't come out of your vagina the way babies are meant to. You never pushed. You never got to have your partner catch your baby or do skin to skin immediately or see that little like army crawl that they do up to the breast. So like all of these things are something that you necessarily wouldn't think of if you were planning a C-section in the hospital, or even if you were planning a hospital birth, but you didn't really care about all these extra little things and you ended up having a C-section, you still wouldn't really understand the frustration of it unless you were in the exact situation. So that Facebook group really, really saved me. And I still go on there pretty regularly. And like, I don't really post very much, but I do see what other people are posting and try to like offer my solidarity. So that's been really, really healing. And then I also did a session with another midwife in the home birth community who like knew my story. And basically she was learning this technique called havening, which is a series of like touches on the face and arms that helps activate delta waves in the brain and basically helps you like rewire how you remember and like not how you remember necessarily, but how you like associate emotion with a traumatic event.
That's really, really cool and interesting.
Yeah.
I've never heard about that.
I had never heard of it either. And so she like let me know that she was getting trained in it. And she's like, if you want, I can offer you a free session. And like, she needed to do a few sessions and tape them for her training. And so she's like, if you want, I'll offer you a free session and I can record you. And I was like, that sounds amazing. Like I have nothing to lose. It doesn't cost anything. If it doesn't work, I'm in the same position I'm in now. So like, whatever. I did a little research on it and I went in very like, I would say skeptical, but I was open-minded, but I wasn't like sold on it because I was like, I don't know. I never heard of this. Like, I don't know anyone that's done it successfully. It's like, how can touching your face and arms like do anything? But I did the session with her and I cried and cried because she has you like go back to the traumatic memory and like whatever emotions are surrounding it and kind of talk about it and talk about what happened. And so it was really nice to talk about it because talking about anything just helps relieve some of the tension. Afterwards felt really refreshed because I'd had a really good cry. And this was a few months after I'd actually had the C-section. So it was 2 months postpartum. And I went home and like the next day I was kind of like, oh my God, like I feel really different about it. I still remembered it and it was still like kind of painful, but it was like a much more like dull, kind of like far away kind of pain. It wasn't like it felt like it had happened a couple years ago. It wasn't such a sharp like pang So the havening session was probably the most effective thing that I did postpartum to help me deal with the trauma of it. And like still to this day, like we're not having our second child just yet, but I would like to, and I would like to try and do another home birth. But there's a small part of me that's still like has this fear of it happening again, even though like I've been through it and it's like I didn't die, like I'm okay. And I also think that because part of the reason it was traumatic is because I wasn't considering transferring to the hospital or a cesarean section at all. Like I didn't consider them possibilities in the slightest. Like I didn't even have a hospital bag packed. And then suddenly like I was on the operating table. So I feel like if I'd prepared myself more, and I talked to my midwife about this and I said, I think it would have been great if we had more of a solid plan about like what to do if we went to the hospital. If I had prepped myself a little bit that I might have a C-section, I might have been more open to it and it would have been less traumatizing. And so I think with my next birth, like regardless of how my pregnancy goes and stuff, if I'm planning to do a home birth, I'm going to have my mind more open to the idea that I might transfer and I might need a C-section, because that alone would make such a huge difference in how I dealt with it afterwards, like how I felt about it afterwards.
Is there anywhere that the listeners can find you if they want to connect?
Yeah, so I actually also have a small business making silver jewelry for moms and babies. My website is sophiafayjewelry.com. That's SOPHIAFAYE jewelry.com. And my handle on Instagram is @SophiaFayJewelry. And on Facebook and Etsy, I'm also Sophia Faye Jewelry. Yeah, they can find me on any of those. And I would love to hear from anyone if they hear this and have any questions for me or want to chat or join the Facebook group Homebirth Cesarean. Please do. It's amazing. Highly recommend.
Thank you so much for being a guest on the podcast and sharing your story. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Lena. I can't wait to hear more episodes with people you interview.
Thank you so much for listening to my interview with Sophia. It was so much fun getting to record this interview and talk to Sophia and learn a little bit more about her. It's always really great for me to connect with other moms, especially local ones. And as Sophia said, she is a silversmith and makes the most adorable jewelry for mamas and babies. My favorite one that she makes is this little like moon mama thingy. It's so cute. I love it. It's adorable. So go check out her Instagram, Facebook, Etsy, all of that jazz. And like I said in the beginning of the episode, you can follow Crunchy Conversations on Instagram or Facebook @Crunchy Conversations. Also, don't forget to join our Facebook group, the Crunchy Conversations Community. If you want to connect with me, you can find me on Instagram or Facebook @It'sCrunchyLena. You can also follow me on my blog, itscrunchyLena.com. Don't forget to subscribe on your favorite podcast listening app, and I'll see you next week. Bye!